Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Tommy Steiner. I'm Policy Director for Signal Group, and welcome to Signal's 9th Annual Conference on Israel's China Policy, and also with reference to the Indo-Pacific. I have the honor to invite the founder and executive leader of Signal Group, Ms. Carice Witte, to start the conference and deliver her opening remarks.
Hi. So first, I want to thank all of you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome. And I want to give a special thanks to Israel's ambassador to China, Her Excellency Irit Ben Abba, who is with us today on her last day in that role. Thank you so much for being here. So I just have to grab my little clicker, and I have to mention that this is actually a safe room. So if you get notices of an alarm or you hear a siren, please stay put. This is the safest place you can be. And as this safety instruction does indicate, we are living in a time of disruption, in fact, defined by disruption. And this is an expansive level of disruption that's going from the shifting dynamics among great powers to the accelerating march of technological change to the regional convulsions that have wreaked this area in the wake of the October 7th attacks. This is not business as usual. We are in a new era, one in which assumptions must be reassessed, strategies reimagined, partnerships recalibrated. Nowhere is this more relevant and more evident than in the intensifying relationship between China and the United States. What began as a dispute on trade has emerged into a full spectrum competition, economic, technological, ideological. This rivalry is actually reshaping alliances and forcing countries around the world, including Israel, to navigate pressures that are complex and often contradictory. Uncertainty has come to define this era. This is precisely why this conference aims to support a clear understanding of the shifting geopolitical landscape and a smarter, more strategic approach to Israel's place in it. Israel as a middle power must chart its course with precision, protect its strategic autonomy, and pursue partnerships that enhance reliance and resilience. To that end, the growing role of the Indo-Pacific countries are on the global stage, are presenting an emerging opportunity for Israel, and one that requires a long-term strategic approach. It's in this context that Signal Group's conference on Israel's China policy plays a role. Our aim is to bring these ideas into the public discourse that is so focused on the challenges of today. Since its launch in 2016, this conference has focused on Israel's China policy, but we expanded in 2023 to also include countries of the Indo-Pacific. And the platform fosters informed strategic thinking on Israel's evolving relationship with China and all of those additional countries. What we've been going through for the past year and a half has been overwhelming. The challenges of today are powerful and costly, but they have also led to Israel rewriting the regional narrative. This was the source of our conference title, China-Israel in a post-October 7th Middle East. In the aftermath of the Hamas attacks on October 7th, Israel's regional posture has undergone a dramatic shift. Military and intelligence successes have changed the dynamics in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. They've also reshaped how external powers, including China, assess Israel's capabilities and conviction in our own security. China's muted response immediately following the Hamas attacks marked a low point in bilateral relations. But with diplomatic efforts now underway that are aiming to restore ties, the relationship stands at a critical juncture. This conference will explore the trajectory of Israel-China relations as both countries rethink their strategic calculus. How should Israel engage a China that aspires to lead the global South, even as it continues to be in a deepening competition with Washington? Yes, China and the US are key players, but they are not the only ones. Israel must widen its perspective and its gaze into the broader Indo-Pacific region that is becoming central to Israel's long-term strategic horizon. Countries like India, Japan, and South Korea are not just regional powers. They are rising global players showing greater interest in cooperation with Israel in technology, defense, connectivity, and innovation. This growing alignment presents Israel with an opportunity to diversify its partnerships, embed itself more deeply into the multipolar framework, and expand its ability to collaborate. Oops. This momentum that is, let me see if I might have, okay. IMEC, the India Middle East Economic Corridor, is just one example of this shift in the momentum behind Israel's ability to connect. As we learned in our inaugural international conference on IMEC that took place 2 weeks ago, we held in partnership with the Danube Institute with 14 countries participating. IMEC reflects a vision of the Europeans, the Middle Easterners, and of India to build resilient supply chains, digital connectivity, and regional integration, where Israel plays a role in that architecture. Today, we are really delighted to have you with us to discuss all of these policy issues. And in closing, I also want to extend a special thanks to China's ambassador to Israel, who will sit with me here on stage in a rare opportunity to have a one-on-one at the close of today. And now, it is my true and very deep honor to introduce Minister M.K. Ghila Gamliel of the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Technology. In her previous position as Minister of Strategic Affairs, M.K. Gamliel received a directive from the Prime Minister back in 2023 to look into the potential for Israel developing an Indo-Pacific strategy. Minister Gamliel's talk today marks the first time in Israel that we will hear about the government's thinking on an Indo-Pacific strategy presented publicly. So without further ado, Minister, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are all living in the Indo-Pacific era. This isn't my statement. I borrowed it from former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who presented his country's Indo-Pacific strategy in late 2022. But I did add the word all, because in my view, all of us are living in the Indo-Pacific era, not just those in the region. Over the next few minutes, I'd like to share the main points of the approach I presented to the Israeli government in September 2024. It's about the need, or rather the necessity for Israel to shape and adopt the dedicated strategy for the Indo-Pacific. I'll also lay out the key principles that I believe such a strategy should include. To be clear, this is a proposal, not a finalized strategy. Context matters. One of the roles of the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology under my leadership is to identify global megatrends that help government prepare to future challenges and opportunities. We do this through the Horizon Scanning Division, which I established in my office. As a minister and a cabinet member, I see it as my responsibility to alert the government and push for a clear approach to a major global region that Israel has largely overlooked. So right now, I'm not presenting Israel's strategy, I am presenting a wake-up call. The first reason Israel needs an Indo-Pacific strategy is simple. This region is becoming the heart of the world. It holds about 2/3 of the world's population and 60% of the global GDP, with an annual growth rate near 5%. It also accounts for half of global maritime trade. In recent decades, it's become a major hub for science, innovation, and industry. In other words, it's critical for global value and supply chains. The second reason is geopolitical. The Indo-Pacific is the main arena for the great powers' competition over the future world order. This rivalry is centered around economics, trade, military power, and technological leadership. These areas are all interconnected. Tech leadership feeds into military and commercial strength, and economic dominance supports tech advancement. That's the heart of the global struggle. This competition is playing out in the Indo-Pacific, where China seeks to expand its influence and it's viewed by the US as a strategic threat. Okay, so the region is important, but what does that have to do with Israel? Until recently, Israel has largely ignored the Indo-Pacific as a region. Yes, we have diplomatic and economic ties with many countries, but these are mostly bilateral and focused on trade. Israel has not seen the Indo-Pacific as a region where it needs to engage or lead, but that's no longer sustainable. The world has changed. More and more countries, some in the region, some outside, have adopted Indo-Pacific strategies. Some are public, others are not. Although it's distance, the geopolitical, economic, and technological trends linked to the Indo-Pacific are reaching our doorstep in the Middle East and affecting Israel. Take China's closer ties with Iran. China is not our enemy, but it is America's rival, and Iran is our enemy. China's Belt and Road initiatives brings it into our region, investing in ports, military bases, energy, and tech. Like it or not, China and the great powers competition are here. It's not just China and Iran. This high-level diplomacy is reshaping the Middle East. Israel needs a clear vision. Where does it want to be in this new order? What does it want to avoid? And what does it want to promote? We're also seeing threats to shipping in the south, especially in the past year and a half due to Houthis' activities, and in some cases, direct threats from Iran to Israeli vessels. Other trends and urgency: India's rise as a global power, economic decoupling, fractured value chains, shifting trade systems, competing tech standards, and a general shift of tech development eastward. Israel is still mostly invested in the West. Put it simply, the game board is changing. If Israel isn't on the board, it's not in the game. That's why Israel needs a comprehensive Indo-Pacific strategy to position itself as a relevant and influential player. We see four main goals for this effort. Influence the shaping of regional and global order. The more valuable Israel is to key players, the more influence it can wield. Frame Iran as a part of the regional threats. Iran threatens not only with its nuclear program, but also with instability and threats to maritime freedom. Build military capability to face regional threats, the Red Sea, Arabian Sea, including Israeli posture and operational intelligence partnerships, and to promote growth and resilience. Israel must be part of regional alliances, economic, political, and security related, focused on supply chains, trade routes, military cooperation, space, and tech. So how do we get there? Israel has some strong assets: scientific and technological leadership, advanced defense and space industries, cyber and intelligence capabilities, and unique relationship with the US. Our geography also matters. We can be a bridge between Asia and Europe. We already have footholds in the region. Cooperation with the US Central Command, the CENTCOM, the Abraham Accords, which we should extend towards normalization with more countries, and building the IMEC land bridges that you mentioned before. Strong ties with India, which we should develop into a full strategic partnership. Our strategy should rest on two pillars: a security defense pillar, deeper CENTCOM ties, smart tech presence in key maritime zones, and joint defense R&D with India, Japan, and South Korea. A civilian pillar, stronger technological cooperation with the regional partners in health, food, climate, water, space, trade routes, energy pipelines, digital infrastructure, AI, of course, and more. To conclude, my vision starts with acknowledging the Indo-Pacific's global importance and how it affects Israel, even if we do nothing. Israel can't afford to stay out of a region that is becoming the world's center. Today, Israel focuses mostly on the US and Europe, but major global shifts are happening in the East. They bring great opportunities and real threats. The Indo-Pacific isn't far away. It's a strategic arena that already impacts us on security, economy, tech, and our future as a nation. The challenge is complex, but the potential is enormous. Ultimately, the strategy we envision must involve many ministries and the stakeholders working together under coordinated leadership. At this point, I feel I must mention 58 kidnapped Israelis held captive by Hamas in Gaza. Our prayers for their return and for the assistance of the international community. In this challenging world of technology, we will not forget the atrocities of October 7th, and we must never forget to place humanity as our highest priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Minister Gamliel for her important speech. I think we will look into it and we'll consider it for some time now, especially since we have been talking about the Indo-Pacific for quite some time. It's always refreshing to hear an Israeli minister speak about it. And this brings me to the next session, which is dedicated to Israel's Indo-Pacific future. I want to first invite Mr. Yehuda or Hudi Lahav, the Executive Vice President for Marketing of the Israel Aerospace Industries. In his remarks, Udi will present briefly why the Indo-Pacific is critical to Israel's national security, at least from the industries or the defense industries perspective. Udi, the floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank you for hosting me here. It's a privilege for me personally and a great honor to speak after our minister in the Israeli government. For the next 10 minutes, I would like to share with you my point of view. It's a narrow angle of view, but it's one of the significant ones regarding the relationship between Israel, I would say, and states and our stakeholders, partners, and friends in the Indo-Pacific region. As Tommy said, I'm the Executive Vice President of Marketing and Sales in the Israeli Aerospace Industries. After 30 years of service in the Israeli Air Force and about 10 years in the Israeli Aerospace Industries, IAI, and for the past 4 years, I'm in this position. I'm walking, running, flying, you name it, in this region for the past 10 years, a lot. IAI, which is the government-owned largest defense company in Israel. This year, we celebrate 73 years of existing. We have 15,000 employees, and we support more than 50,000 of householders in Israel. Basically, just to get a short overview on IAI, we have started as a small garage to repair airplanes for our young Air Force in the 50s. And now we are activate in space, in air, in land, maritime, on water, underwater, cyber, and everything is enveloped with artificial intelligence, very strong one. In the defense area, I would say that we are one of the few designer, manufacturers, I would say OEM, of satellites, all kinds of satellites, observations, communications, ground station, everything. We have the multi-mission aircraft, it's intelligence aircrafts. I think one of the most famous, I would say, for the past 1.5 years is our air defense system, which is called Arrow. So every Israeli knows what is an Arrow system. For the past 1.5 years, just this week, some of our friends in Jerusalem has an alert in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. They got into the shelter for 10 minutes. Our Arrow missiles has succeeded to intercept the threats from Yemen. And after 10 minutes, they finished with the event, and went for their daily basis activities. This is an unnormal situation, gentlemen, ladies, unnormal. But the major assets, I would say, as my former speaker spoke, our main assets in Israel is our brain. That's it. And we are totally supportive by the US. By the way, the Aero system was a joint development with the US, and we are blessing on this technological achievements nowadays. And it's incredible achievements, and everyone can say that we can keep on going with our normal life with such a technological cutting-edge system that we have invented here. We are dealing also with radars, short range and very, very long range, to see from where the ballistic missiles are being launched. We have UAVs. We are the ones that invented the concept of airplanes without pilots. Airplanes that you can control from the ground. Why do you have to risk human beings in a threats area when you can do it without those risks? And today, everybody talks about UAVs all over the world. You can see it. And we have also a civil aviation group. We are one of the 11 companies in the world that are designer airplanes, especially business jet airplanes, manufactures and sells them. One of the examples is the Gulfstream 280. We have a cooperation with this American OEM. But along the history, we had more than 15 airplanes that we are the OEM of those. And we are the world leader of conversions of passengers aircraft to freighter, to cargo aircraft. So this is the wide variety of domain that we are dealing with. And we are making business with the Indo-Pacific area for more than 30 years. So my point of view, when I will share it with you in a moment, is lying on a perspective of 30 years, still doing business, developing it, and anticipate I would say, in a humble way, for at least for the next decade. Naturally, the defense business is very sensitive because you are touching in the very tiny, sensitive, classified topics that belong or relative to the national security of each and every customers and partners. So I cannot speak about specific examples, as you understand, and if you don't understand, I'm sorry. There is no customer that would like to publish those issues with other friends or other people or audience. So, but these classified issues, those classified issues and sensitive issues are being the locomotive of all the other activities that the state of Israel has with this region. Why is that? Because when there is a conversation or discussion on intelligence issues, on a common threats, this is a very intimate or generating intimate relationship And for the past 4 years, the business has been changed dramatically in the region. After the COVID-19 pandemic, that time in 2020 and 2021, there were a lot of troubles and challenges with supply chain. We couldn't fly. We couldn't support only by a video conference and phone call and something like this. But most of the cases, you cannot sell a missile on a phone. This is not a whiskey or a wine or bamba for the Israeli. This is something sensitive. And you cannot sell any product in the defense domain as a product. You have to be a trusted advisor to your friends, to your customer or partner, and you have to start the discussion on the concept, on what is the purpose, what is your need, what is your requirement, how can I support you? And after the COVID pandemic, in 2022, the war in Ukraine has started. And those two events, major event I would say, has reached to the states, all of the friends in the region, to an insight that they have to be self-reliant. And what does it mean self-reliant? They want the know-how, how to design, how to develop, how to produce those sensitive systems in their own soil. They don't want to be dependent on other friends or other countries. So this new policy changed the way we are doing business today. And the Israeli aerospace industries, with a strategic decision of this region, has decided, our management, that we have to change. We have to be an inherent player in the huge ecosystem of the Indo-Pacific region. For the past 3 years, we have established 10 companies in the region. We have established more than 15 joint ventures. We have joint activities. We took the position of a local player in this region and in the states, mainly the heavy states of the region. And we have been starting to play as an Indian playing, as a South Korean, and other countries. And the impact of changing, of doing business, defense business, and civil aviation business in this way change the, I would say, how we are presenting, what is the image. 1 minute, I will finish. What is the branding of IAI as a local partner in the region? And we can see from that time, from the past 3-4 years, that the impact is expanding to agriculture, to healthcare, to high-tech, to cyber. And all of those businesses that along the years, they were blocked, suddenly became another significant domain in how we're doing business, and moreover, this prosperity, I would say, developed and leverage the relationship, the political level of relationship between Israel and those countries. And we can see it all over the world in many, many events, voting in the UN, and so on. This region, we are not part of the conflicts in the region, but we are definitely friends, true friends with our allies, and we are with them shoulder to shoulder, not only in a daily, regular days, but in also in a tough period of time. And they appreciate our support and the opportunities and the potential that I can see not only in the defense area, but with all the commercial business direction is enormous if we will know how to act as a local player in this region. We cannot come to our friends with only sales and buy relationship. It doesn't work. You have to be there. You have to show your friends that you are investing in them. You have to transfer technology, and it's okay with us regarding our regulation, of course. But there is no limit for both prosperity, Israel and this region. I can see a very good future if we will know how to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, I hope that we also have another speaker joining us online. I hope. But anyway, let me first introduce the speakers that are to my left. Dr. Victor Israel from the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology. To his left, Mr. Roy Feder from APCO Worldwide, and online in India, Captain Sarbjit Parmar. Good evening, actually I should say, right? It's now good evening. Good evening, Captain. Well, we have been discussing earlier today and also after the minister's presentation, what is Israel's Indo-Pacific future if it has one? Should it have one? Should it aspire for one? And if so, what should she do about, what should Israel do about this? Without, of course, ignoring certain possible risks that comes with expanding to the Indo-Pacific. So, Victor, if I may, why Indo-Pacific? Why now? Good.
Good afternoon to everyone. So my minister said that the center of the gravity of the world is shifting towards the east for, I think, almost two decades from now, the past 2 decades. That's enough for look into east for Israel, but there are another security issues. After the 7th October, if the economic, technology, the center of gravity, it's not enough for us to look at the east. After the 7th October attack, we have security problems from the Red Sea, the Houthis from Yemen, and the Arabian Sea from the Iran side. So now we have also another layer of interest to considering the economic, technology, transportation, cyber, space, and other things that we should look at the East. Now we have also a security issue to look at the East. Another issue is that the initiative of IMEC, we need to think about IMEC. It's not just a connectivity to the region as a vision. It's also has a part of security issues. So when security issues add on top of the issues of economy, it starts to be a strategic for us. So that's for now.
All right. So, Roy, if I may disclose the fact that 2 weeks ago you spent some time in Budapest on a conference on IMEC. Do you think Israel has something to do there at IMEC? Is it worth our while, or is it just a pipe dream? And I should add, because IMEC has been thrown out here already several times in the past 20 or 30 minutes, IMEC is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which at its hub connects India, Middle East, and Europe, but through Haifa, through Israel specifically. So are we welcome? Is Israel welcome there? Do we have a future? Is it?
Well, I'll start by, I'll say thank you for having me here. Great to be with everyone, and thank you for inviting me to another event. I was in Budapest 2 weeks ago, and we did talk about some of these issues. Does Israel have anything to offer? Look, I think, you know, if you think about Israel as a product and what does a product needs to have, well, currently maybe the product has some reputational challenges. Let's put that on the side for a sec. But as you know, what it does offer, geography, I think, as the minister said, we are well positioned geographically to be the entry point in the Mediterranean with advanced ports, with growing capacity going into the Mediterranean. So that's certainly a major advantage. You know, Israel was a hub of the British Mandate for a reason. You know, we didn't invent this, and we should just take advantage of it. The second, and this is not talked about a lot, but we really need to make sure this is a consistent. I'm repeating something that I said 2 weeks ago, but I don't think many of you were there, so I'll say it here again. If you look at the board to your right, and you're seeing the stock exchange, it's green and red, you should try to follow some of the financial institutions in Israel who have really done pretty well today. I think there's an average of 5% growth of Israelis' financial institutions this morning. I don't know where they stand at this point of the day. We'll see if, you know, in a couple of minutes where this ends. Israel has $1.7 trillion sitting in its private financial institutions. So Israel is financially in a very strong position. Unlike other countries in the region, this is not government mandated or owned, but still there's a lot of capacity to use in terms of investing towards some of these major projects. We certainly have the technology. I mean, we can talk about this. Everybody knows Israel is a strong technological powerhouse. There's a lot of concern regarding security. So Yuda was just talking about Israel's security capabilities and how that's relevant for the region. I do think that Israel has a lot to offer. The question is it going to focus on creating now its own abilities so that when this vision comes into reality, it's already well placed to take this and activate it and not wait around for other competitors, because there are competitors in Turkey, in Egypt, to circumvent Israel?
I'll take that. But I have a more important question, which I would like to direct to Captain Palmer. I heard now, you know, you've been hearing from Israelis now that they've discovered the Indo-Pacific, which is about time. But the question is, let's put it be very straightforward, you know, we're Israelis. Does any buyers there? Does the Indo-Pacific actually want us?
Okay, thank you, Tommy, and shalom and good evening from New Delhi. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. All right, so the question is, anybody is welcome in the Indo-Pacific, provided they have a very clear vision of what they bring to the table as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. And specifically with Israel, given the manner in which certain nations in the Indo-Pacific look at Israel, and there are, of course, external influences that develop those ideas, Israel's entry to the Indo-Pacific has to be a very considered decision at the political level. That's one. The Indo-Pacific is a huge area, so therefore, the error of having strategic and an economic stretch in a hurry if you enter the region is very, very high. So the question is, when you elaborate your vision or your guidelines or your strategy, there is a certain clarity that is needed. It's already been covered that Israel has got defense relations with many nations, and of course, the relationship with India is unique and goes back many years. But how many nations would be willing to jump on the bandwagon of only defense relations, because it remains a bilateral issue? Engaging the Indo-Pacific means entering a multinational environment. And so therefore, to avoid that specific stretch, Israel would have to consider which area of the Indo-Pacific it would like to enter first. And I divide the Indo-Pacific into areas. That's the Indian Ocean region, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and the rest of the Pacific or the Western Pacific area. My understanding is that Israel would be more comfortable in engaging the Indian Ocean region and the East Asia region, given its relationships, especially with India, South Korea, and Japan. And therefore, it needs to be very clear what it brings to the table in terms of soft power. What is it that nations will benefit from their economic. The whole other idea is the issue of trust. So the trust angle has to be developed, and that's very slowly. So Israel needs to engage the multinational organizations in the Indo-Pacific. IORA and BIMSTEC are two examples I can give you from the Indian Ocean region, ASEAN from Southeast Asia, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, till the time that acceptance is not there, could look at working at the minilateral level. We already have I2U2, and therefore that's a start point. But Israel and India, with a number of other nations, and I will suggest restrict to 5, look at certain convergences, look at areas where these nations would benefit from Israel's entry, and the working relations of India and Israel to essentially develop the necessary capacities and capabilities of nations who seek to benefit from what Israel brings from the table. And I'll pause here, and within questions, I'll take it on later.
That was very good. But Victor, if I may, I think that Captain Palmer outlined a long list of things that we have to do. We are 601 days into the war, since October 7. Do we have the mindset, or as where somebody would say, "What the hell are you talking about?"
We have to in the government. I don't know if the attention of the government is now on the Indo-Pacific. I know that
the attention of the government, the attention of the public.
Yes, but we have to, because the future is not waiting for us to be prepared for the right moment that we have the attention to focus on it. So Israel has to be a more influential in the Indo-Pacific, because her future is depending on that. Because when I look in the long term to the next decades, the center of the gravity of the world, and of course, it's also for if we want to be more influential and more in weight in the international arena, not just for the Indo-Pacific, also for the Europe and US, we have to be more active in the Indo-Pacific. So, and we must to act now. Yes, we have a good base because we have already a good relationship with many countries. As my colleague here mentioned from India, that we have good ties with India regarding defense, but it's not enough. It's just the base for the next level of relationship with the area, with thinking about multinational to join to multinational organization in the area,
Like
and so on.
what? Which organizations are you referring to?
I think about in the manner of civil side, IORA. Think about to start a dialogue, not be a full partner in the first steps with the Asian, maybe we can start also to speak in the security issue with Quad+1 or Pillar 2 in the AUKUS.
All right. You said a lot of words that most of the audience what about. These are multilateral institutions in the Indo-Pacific, in Indian Ocean, but you come from the world of strategy, business strategies, and strategic consulting. Do you really see the Israeli government, and you heard the minister here outline the basic parameters for Israeli strategy for the Indo-Pacific. Do you see this happening, or what needs to be done to get it happen?
I guess this is Chatham House rules, right? This is just a conversation between us, right?
Yes, it's only recorded, live, broadcasted on Zoom, but yes.
Not now. Let's be honest. I don't think the current Israeli government has the ability to deal with some of these issues because it's busy with many other issues, and I don't think it has the political capacity to move things forward. However, I don't see, to Victor's point, I don't think we have a choice, and given the fact that this is, and no one's waiting around for us, whatever political constitution happens next, this does need to happen, and I think it will happen as soon as whatever political structure takes place. We'll be able to focus on these issues a bit more. I have had a few interesting conversations with folks. Clearly, this is part of the. It's on the drawing table, which is encouraging. There is focus on this. The question is, politically, can it be moved forward at this point? Probably not.
And take it up a level. But there's another side to this story. We're talking about Israel's Indo-Pacific future, but at the end of the day, we are, and when it comes also, both of you mentioned IMEX, so did the minister, and did Captain Palmer. But the issue is, at the end of the day, it's not about only Israel engaging the Indo-Pacific, it's also about the Indo-Pacific engaging Israel, engaging the Middle East. Is there, Captain Palmer, a growing interest in what in India and in the Indo-Pacific they refer to as West Asia? Is more appetite for getting involved in West Asia, aka Middle East?
Well, I'm not sure how much of the Indo-Pacific nations would have an interest in West Asia, and that's a term I'll use for this discussion here. The further you move away from a particular region, the less is the interest in that particular region. So therefore, the interest in West Asia will remain centered mainly by the nations who are in the Northwest Indian Ocean region, specifically the Arabian Sea, and of course the entry into the Persian Gulf. So therefore the audience is limited. If there is a manner in which an engagement can be done with these nations, of course, I mean, Iran was already mentioned, and of course, I take to heart what the minister said about calling this the heart of the world, but insofar as relations with West Asia are concerned, the heart will remain in the North Arabian Sea. So therefore there is a doorway of opportunity where the number of nations to interact with are less. It's been done before. Perhaps we need to look at a different avenue. And getting back to the point about Israel entering the Indo-Pacific, let me give you a narrative which is there in India, that our outreach to the Indo-Pacific perhaps put our neighborhood first policy in a little bit of a paralysis, and we have issues with our neighborhood first policy. And so therefore that's a pitfall that perhaps Israel would like to avoid when it considers stepping into the Indo-Pacific.
All right. So, in other words, if I'm listening to what you're saying, there are also risks involved in engaging the Indo-Pacific. Victor, are we considering those risks?
I think there are, of course, risks regarding, because the Indo-Pacific became the arena for the great power, the central arena for the great power competition. Israel, of course, is well connected. China is important for us as a partner, but USA is our ally. And the more there will be a competition and tension between those in the GPC, its influence.
Great power competition, let's call it. It's the great power competition.
Great power competition, GPC, yes, great power competition. The more the tension between the superpowers in the region, the more its influence on Israel, because Israel it's need to choose one side from another, and we don't want to do that specifically in the region of the Indo-Pacific, because as my former lecturer said, that we don't want to be involved in the conflicts in that area. So that's one risk we have when we get more engaged with this area. I think about another risk is when I look in the long term about the international order. One of the scenarios is that will be two blocks, one blocks, and decoupling is the new trends that company has in the last few years, and if we will be in the one side, and other countries from the region will be in the other side of the block. So it will rise the tension between both of us. So if we will be more involved in the Indo-Pacific, it will influence us what the relationship we need to.
If I understand correctly, since I can understand why you are more reluctant to be open, speak openly on this. So let me try to translate. You need not to approve or disapprove what I'm going to say. Your concern essentially is that if indeed we will see growing tension between the United States and China, and we see the emergence of two blocs, and our neighbors in the Middle East surrounding us, namely, you're referring to the Gulf countries, or some of them, will actually, so to speak, choose to be on the on one block, and we remain on another block, that will cause even more strategic issues for Israel. Is that more or less, I didn't even say which side Israel will be, though I hope it's clear to anybody. Is that the scenario that you are?
Yes, correct.
Exactly. So, Roy, from your engagements, is there a chance that Israel and its Arab neighbors will find themselves on opposing ends of such a bloc? And by the way, is that scenario so? What are the prospects of this scenario? There'll be two blocs really decoupling.
Let me separate Israel from that for a second. I'll talk about some of the other markets. If any of you have traveled in the region, let's say to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, you will find that these are one of the places where Russians and Ukrainians do travel to on a regular basis. You will find that there are businesses between these countries and Iran. I think there's a sentiment in the region, in the GCC for sure, to maintain open dialogue with everyone, balancing between Russia, Ukraine, the US, China, Israel, Iran. There's a sentiment of let's have as many friends as possible, because we don't know where the risk is going to come from, and we need to make sure that we are de-risking everything. So engage is something that these countries are doing. Israel's caught in a different place. Israel is much more dependent on the US, I think, than other countries in the region because of a variety of issues. These go way beyond economics. So could Israel and its allies find itself, and the Arab countries find itself in different camps? Possibly. I think right now they're in different camps in many respects. So Could that continue? I think it depends on some of the things Israel does. You know, there's a current hesitation by the business community to deal with Israel. Well, let's just be open about it. There's an extra level of reputational risks that coincides with dealing with Israel. And if you want to make sure that there's a much more open way of engaging in the region, that has to be dealt with. And I think that's something we need to think about as well.
All right, point taken. Captain Parmar, coming back to this issue of India's involvement with IMEC, and we've heard different versions on what is India's strategic, why is it such a strategic imperative on the Indian side? Because, in Israel, it's not a common feature, it's not a common topic. Why is it such a prominent topic in the strategic discourse in India today?
So I think the major issue is India's outreach of plurilateralism and having options that forward economic and trade routes. And that's where IMEC falls right now. I read somewhere earlier that as an alternate to IMEC, there was a push for a trade route through Africa. It was being pushed by the US and Europe. I'm not sure where all that went, because the areas that it ran through Africa were also unstable and perhaps could be compared to the instability that exists in West Asia right now. And therefore, India's interest is to have as many options for movement of trade. We have seen the Bab el Mandab and the Red Sea route being avoided by merchant marine, and therefore the route via the Cape of Good Hope. But the quantum that is carried by ships far exceeds that can be carried by land. So when you look at IMEC, there is a limitation when it starts crossing the land and then it comes out onto the Mediterranean side of the geographical area. But the question remains is that who would be willing to invest in building the IMEC where there is instability in that particular region? And that also extends to the North Arabian Sea, by the way. We've had a 4-day conflict with Pakistan. Of course, there was heightened tension in the North Arabian Sea. So this is actually always a flashpoint. And if you remember what the Indian Minister of Commerce and Trade, Mr. Piyush Goyal, had said some time back, he says one of the 5 pointers he said was to make IMEC a public-private partnership and let the private companies and the private entities take it forward, because that's where the money lies. And the governments can only work towards ensuring a modicum of stability, that first of all infrastructure is built and then it is maintained and then it continues to run. So that's where the interest comes in.
Victor, why should we care? Why should Israel care about IMEC?
So let me start that from the Israeli perspective about the strategy for the Indo-Pacific. IMEC is important, but it's not condition for strategy. It's very, very important. It's a physical connectivity, and it's locate Israel in the future as a major actor in the area of Indo-Pacific for the Europe and for the Indo-Pacific, because the land bridge we will be according to the vision. But as I mentioned, IMEC it's take at least 20 years or 25 years to accomplish this project if it will start tomorrow. But the vision is necessary, and we have the strategic. We have to start to act strategically by leveraging our national strengths of in Israel, the tech issues, space, cyber, intelligence, security issue, and that's not depend on land and transportation connectivity, and on top of that, we have alongside that the vision for connectivity, physical for connectivity by IMEC.
So we're coming to the end. I'm already in the stage of asking final questions, but will something like this combination, help with what you said about the reputational risks associated with doing business with Israel?
You're talking about the
IMEC plus what Victor said.
look. Victor's right in terms of setting up the connectivity. When it comes to reputation, there's a lot more than just having a physical connection. I think that there is a narrative that we need to have. There's a narrative that is important with regards to what our vision is, where we want to go, how we want to connect, what do we offer the region, what do we offer our friends, what do we deflect, how do we secure, how do we finance. There's a lot of things we need to talk about as relates to this vision to make it a reality. Then follows trust building, which was talked about here. Then follows the confidence building measures with allies, with the business community, with the financial community. So does it help? Yes. There's work to be done. I think that the best thing to do, and again, I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing, is to start here. And make sure that at least we are ready for when this happens. At least we have the regulatory issues sorted. We've got the technicalities in terms of how we're establishing the standards sorted. We have the financial frameworks. We've already looked at the feasibility studies of where the projects is going to be, and we're ready to be investable. If we show some of that seriousness and forward-looking approach, and start to actually do things. And look, there are roots between the region and Israel. It's not as big as it will be, but this exists. If we start to just be one step ahead, I think reputationally we're in a better place.
Captain Palmer, would you agree to what he said? And finally, also, there's one aspect that if you could briefly touch on, because IMEC is basically also connecting India with UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. How important is that in itself geostrategically for India?
Connectivity has its own merits, especially where trade is concerned, which means that you have multiple avenues of connecting up nations by sea, by land, and it also enters into the global network. Therefore, every avenue that is built will only add to the economies of the regional nations through which that particular connectivity route passes through. So therefore, there is merit in looking at IMEC, but then stability would have to be the first step.
I want to thank you all very much. Victor, Roy, Captain Palmer in India, good night to you. Thank you very much. I want to invite Kariswita to take over from me to moderate the next session. We will start immediately. We will continue immediately.
So let's invite our next set of speakers. Would Professor Leo Leiterman please come to the stage? And Maraike and Ashok from India. And I hope on screen we're going to have Rush Doshi from the US. There you are. Welcome, welcome. Could we bring some water to the stage, please? Thank you. Okay, so now we move on to the subject of the day, disruption. And we're looking at it from the angle of the China-US rivalry and what does that mean for Israel. Navigating disruption is always going to be a challenge, and as much as the US-China competition leads to disruption and change and new alliances, new regional cooperation, certainly the Trump administration is also representing a great deal of disruption. not only how it's dealing with China, but on a broad sense. And this is really impacting every region individually. Each region is being impacted both by the the China-US rivalry and competition, but also the Trump administration disruption. And then we have the global factor. China is taking new approaches. It's building new styles of alliances. And I think we see for the first time it's working on minilateral relationships. It inaugurated the China, Gulf, Southeast Asia trilateral with the GCC and ASEAN just now. So we want to understand from this esteemed panel, and we're going to bring back our American speaker now. We are very happy to have with us to discuss these issues and the transformations that are taking place, what is happening on the US-China front, and how it's impacting Israel. And our speakers today include our international guests, and I want to note we have 3 international guests this year in the context of the war. That is a great improvement because last year only 1 had the bravery to make it. But now we have from Germany, Marike Olberg, from India, Ashok Malik, and 1 from China who you'll meet in... From Argentina. But many years in Israel, like me. So we are, I just want to briefly introduce Ashok, who is a partner and chair of the India practice at the Asia Group, formerly of the Ministry of External Affairs of India. Marike is a senior fellow at the Indo-Pacific program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Leo Leiterman is the chief economic advisor of Bank Hapoalim and also a professor at Tel Aviv University. And Rush Doshi, who is zooming in from Washington, is the director of the China Strategy Initiative at the Council on Foreign Relations and formerly of the National Security Council in the US. So, Rush, I'm going to give you the honor of sort of laying the foundations for this conversation, setting the scene of these changes that are taking place due to the US-China competition, and how do you see these changes impacting the global stage, but also from your perspective, Israel?
Sure. Well, thank you. It's great to be with you and look forward to the discussion. I'll just start by saying that right now, it's pretty clear the US-China rivalry is having enormous impact on the global strategic environment. And the primary place, obviously, we're seeing that impact is in the economic domain. So let's talk a little bit about that. The past panel mentioned briefly the reality that the US and China are pursuing some form of decoupling, or previously what was called de-risking. I think this is something that both countries are thinking about. The US wants to bring back manufacturing or diversify it outside the United States. And China, for over a decade, has been thinking about indigenizing its supply chains, making the world more dependent on China, and China less dependent on the world. And that dual circulation policy that China has is a pretty good example of that. That's the first point. The second point is that has led us to this trade war in large part. China's surplus with the world is unsustainable, particularly the United States. It is 30% of global manufacturing, but only 17% of global consumption. And right now, what that's meant is the US wants to rebalance the terms of trade. Now, the trade war has reached a temporary ceasefire, if you will. With both sides meeting in Geneva, there was an effort to kind of reduce the tariff rates. And many people took, some good feelings from that meeting. But the reality is, and this brings me to a third point, the trade war is not over. Geneva may have happened. Tariffs may have come down, but as we just saw in the last 24 hours, much more is still happening. And this is becoming not a trade war, but an export control war, essentially. China continues to throttle supplies of rare earths and rare earth magnets to the United States, which has significant impacts on industrial production in America. And meanwhile, the US is exerting pressure now on semiconductor design technology, design tools, preventing them from being used by China and potentially threatening to kick out hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in the United States. So we're seeing continued escalation, which means that trade deal is not quite going to hold, potentially down the road. The next frontier, this is my fourth and final point, could be financial escalation. We've seen the trade war, we've seen export control tit for tat. What comes next could be some kind of financial escalation where both sides, China perhaps playing with its stocks of US treasuries, the US perhaps going after Chinese banks, all that creates further escalation. I'll end with this. A lot of countries are caught in the middle. They're caught in the middle because the US is renegotiating trade agreements with those countries and is trying to find out what role they will have with China. And what will their trade arrangement with China be? Will there be hubs for transshipment? So there's an element where the US is trying to exert some degree of influence over the China-related trade policies of other countries. And the second way countries are caught in the middle is that supply chains are being disrupted, and often that impacts them directly. So a moment of great transformation, great transition, the greatest international economic disruptions since the 1970s, and we don't yet know how it's all going to end.
Thank you, Rush. I think that being caught in the middle has a different meaning for different countries, in part perhaps because of their size, and in part because of how they have played their global economic ties and relations over the past few decades. So, Mareike, I'm going to turn to you, who you have the perspective of German and also deep understanding of China. So, do you think Germany's caught in the middle, and how do you see the China-U.S. rivalry impacting your area, and also if you could give an opinion on what you think it might mean for us?
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, Germany is impacted. Germany has always been impacted by the US-China rivalry, even though we have, I think, in Europe for the longest tried to pretend that geopolitics doesn't exist. Germany was basically in this arrangement where it had security provided by the United States, while it could economically deepen its ties with China. Our automotive industry, which is a big part of the German economy, is heavily reliant on China, which has for the longest time shaped German China policy, which sometimes has had impact on not just German China policy, but European China policy. Now, for the past couple of years, we've already seen a little bit of change. It's not entirely new to us that maybe we can't continue like this. So over the last couple of years, Germany has already, there's been some progress in figuring out that maybe we can no longer do this. We're going to have to de-risk our relationship with China. We're not going to need to make sure that, because if push comes to shove and we're going to have to pick sides, we're going to have to most likely side with the United States. That was, I mean, obviously the the understanding, and still is. So we are heavily affected. I do think there is a great deal of uncertainty right now in Germany what to do. I think people did prepare for the Trump administration, but they didn't prepare enough. And I think the scenario that I've seen has kind of exceeded people's expectations of what they thought. I think people were prepping for a Trump 1+ scenario. So a little bit like the first Trump administration, but a little more. So right now there is a lot of rethinking, how are we going to deal with this? What we're also seeing is a lot of outreach from China towards Europe, towards Germany in particular, to, you know, we have a common opponent in the United States. The United States is pressuring both us and Europe from the Chinese perspective on trade. So why don't we work together? It's also my understanding that there's a lot of concern in the US about this, whether Europe is going to turn towards China. In all of this, I think the reason why we won't is China doesn't have a lot of substance to offer to Europe. Europe has very specific things it wants from China. It wants China to reform its economic model in a way that overcapacities no longer flood the European market. That is something that China won't do, because it means having to revamp the entire Chinese economic system. And the other thing it wants from China is stop supporting Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. That is something where perhaps we can achieve something if we're willing to link up issues and start pushing for our interests more vigorously. But also, I'm not too optimistic that we will get any concessions. So to come to a close, what Europe needs to do, what Germany needs to do, and also what Israel needs to do is figure out, okay, what are our interests, our core interests, our interests vis-a-vis China? What is China willing to give us? Perhaps how can we link up with others who are in a similar situation, and how can we push the hardest possible to actually assert our interests vis-a-vis China and sometimes vis-a-vis the United States, depending on which position we're in. And that really is the best strategy. And that's something that, at least in Europe, we're struggling with. I'm not as familiar with the context here in Israel, but I do think there is possibly also a certain reluctance to push for certain things vis-a-vis China, but that ultimately is something that we're going to have to do.
So it's a high-stakes game where we're talking about economy. I think you were referencing the car industry is huge. Germany is very dependent on the car industry and its car industry within China, which is diminishing in relevance for the Chinese and becoming probably a growing problem for Germany. But the definition of being caught in the middle when you are 1.4 billion people is very different. And that is India. India is not caught in the middle. So how do you see if you're not caught in the middle, what is the status of India with respect to this rivalry? How is it impacting you? And what do you see as the path forward?
Oh, we are not caught in the middle. We are the middle. Okay. Thank you for having me here, Carice and Signal. 3 points. One, when we talk about the US-China rivalry, de-risking, decoupling, I'd like to distinguish a long-term trend line with what I would call the Trump acceleration, which is a somewhat sort of up and down acceleration. We don't know where it'll settle, but there is a long-term trend line which is different from the Trump acceleration, which preceded Trump, perhaps was set in pace by Trump 1, continued by Biden, and will continue in 28 or 29, irrespective of who becomes president. What Trump has done is he's brought his own sort of disruption to that trend line. Biden and Jake Sullivan defined the economic decoupling as small yard, high fence. Trump has decided he wants a much larger yard. Whether that large yard is feasible and bringing back all of that manufacturing that he wants to bring back to the US is feasible or even worthwhile is very, very unclear. I would think there's a rethink needed somewhere at some point, but that's besides the point. But that is where we are. Having said that, the essential argument successive American presidents, including Trump, have had with the sourcing of supply chains and concentration of supply chains and sourcing in certain geographies in China and regions around China is an argument many other countries have also had. India's also had that. And if supply chains begin to decongest, if sourcing begins to become a little more equitable, some of that will benefit India. It will not benefit only India. It will benefit many other countries, but it will benefit India as well. And we will certainly welcome that. Okay. Second, you're talking about how countries are choosing between the US and China. I think there are two very interesting trends here. One, the space for hedging between the US and China is narrowing, is contracting. However, for countries that are broadly aligned with America or more pro-America, the propensity to hedge with other countries in that subsphere vis-a-vis America is growing. So you want to work with America, but you also want diverse partners. To turn a Reagan aphorism around, you want to trust but diversify, which is what India is doing by doing stuff with Australia and now New Zealand in a trilateral, which is what India is doing with Japan and South Korea in a technology partnership that was blessed by America, but now is independent of America in some respects, though it wants to work with America. This is what India is doing in signing an FTA with the UK or negotiating an early harvest agreement with the EU. And the EU is also more interested post-Trump in doing this with India. These are all small wins. None of them replaces the large win that would be a greater American presence, but it is where we are. In essence, America is no longer the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It is the 700-pound gorilla in the room. The point is, for each of us, including Israel, how do we fill the remaining 100 pounds? We can't fill it with just one actor or one relationship. We need to fill it with multiple relationships, each of which add some weight to that missing 100 pounds. And those multiple partnerships, those multiple arrangements, those several plurilaterals and minilaterals will stretch across the security and economic continuum. And I would imagine Israel would also want to go down that route.
So let's find out. Leo, being caught in the middle versus or at the same time following Ashok's theory of this being a motivating factor to diversify relationships and establish new bilateral but also minilateral relationships. How does this sit with Israel in the U.S.-China rivalry?
Okay. Thanks, and thanks, Caris, and your whole group for this impressive conference and for inviting me to take place on it. First of all, on China, U.S., U.S.-China, I'm not optimistic. I think that we are going to see fluctuations in the sentiment. And right now, of course, as we know, Donald Trump has sort of created a pause until July 9th, or the second week of July, both vis-a-vis the European Union and vis-a-vis China. If someone wants to believe that on July 10th or July 15th, we will say, well, we now have a new set of parameters of trading between nations. These are the tariff rates between the US and Mexico. Forget about it. Because I think by the mere nature of Trump, his unpredictability and his changing mood and zigzags in the policies based on an hourly sentiment, we are going to see a lot of variability and turbulence from that point of view. So I think from this point of view, we have all to prepare for all his term. I hope this will be the last term of Donald Trump. And as an economist, I can say that it is a very unfortunate accident that has happened to the global economy, because the notion of trade wars and the notion of deglobalization and the whole narrative of Mr. Trump that it is the competition with China and Europe has produced less and less jobs in the United States is completely false, and there is a lot of research and evidence about that. And basically, when Trump gets to the White House on January 20th, the United States is in full employment. There is no problem of employment in the United States. And the United States is growing very nicely. And the United States is the #1 country that has benefited from importing cheap raw materials, cheap intermediate goods and final goods from the rest of the world. Anyway, so that's my first point. On the issue of Israel, first point is that we have to put it on the table. Israel is in a state of a very unfortunate war. And it is my hope, as a citizen of this country, as an economist and so on, that this war will end for the benefit of everybody in the region as soon as possible, with all the refugees and all our people there coming back here. Now, clearly, a lot of the discussion that we can have about these very important topics will depend on how Israel ends the war. So if Israel is becomes more isolated, and vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis China, and so on and so forth, maybe there will be some rivalry with the US. We heard yesterday about some conversations that were very tough between Donald Trump and Mr. Netanyahu about the possibility of attacking Iran and so on and so forth. So parameter number one is how Israel is going to end this war, and I hope it happens sooner rather than later. The second point I would like to make is thinking more positively about the potential. Yes, we are in the middle. And for a small open economy like Israel, the trade in goods, services, and finance with China is very important. It is very important for us with Europe, that is our main trading partner. It is very important for us with the United States. What is Israel's comparative advantage? Israel's comparative advantage is in advanced technologies. This is what we can offer the world. And I think that from this point of view, if the conditions at the end of the war are good enough, then we should focus on those areas where there will be demand, where we can serve the interests of the United States, Europe, and China in terms of technology. We know from the past that if there is one sort of dangerous and risky area for Israel to involve in the area of technology vis-a-vis the US, vis-a-vis China, is the combination of defense, intelligence, and technology. So I think, and I'm very much in touch with the startup nation in Israel, and some of my former students and colleagues are involved in startups and so on and so forth. As long as we focus in Israel on comparative advantage that can serve the medical industry, producing a new medicine for a given problem, developing some computer devices for education, and so on. Nothing that gets near issues like intelligence, defense, the army, the military. I think this would be the most advised area to follow. And to end, if I really want to be sort of optimistic and positive, I think that if we will have a new Middle East, Israel will have a lot to offer to the countries in the region, again, in terms of technology, in terms of building infrastructure for services, not only for industry, and including, of course, Saudi Arabia. And I believe it will be in the interest of the United States and in the interest of China the morning after, right? That with such a potential contribution of Israel knowledge and know-how to the region, and we have the Abraham Accords, of course, and we can solidify that. And any sort of, although it is an indirect effect, but any strength that we can offer to contribute to this region to become more stable and more growing one, I think will be in the benefit of everyone.
Okay, so Rush, what do you see from the other side of the Atlantic regarding the potential for minilateral relationships that are not necessarily involving the US or China in order to navigate this complex new trajectory of international relations? And looking at the middle powers in our region, we know that countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, even Israel, they have a global reach in what they offer and what they are involved in. So how does the U.S. and how do you see the potential for those kinds of relationships developing as a result of this competition?
Well, it's a fair question. And in the Biden administration, there was great support for minilaterals, sometimes with the U.S., but as was referenced earlier, just as often without the U.S. The joke was that within Asia, the U.S. had a hub and spokes model, a U.S. hub and allied spokes. And what was beneficial for the region was for there to be a tire around the spokes. In other words, for them to connect to each other without necessarily touching the hub. So there's still value in that. But let me break down your question in two dimensions. The first is security, and the second is economics and technology. In the security space, there's a lot that can be done within minilaterals. Just take India and Israel right now. A lot of India's most advanced technology, including what was just recently used in the conflict with Pakistan, has Israeli components. And of course, we all know that there's a lot of ways in which European militaries, with their production of certain precision-guided munitions, Southeast Asians have demand for those. The Indians want submarines, maybe the French can help. The Koreans want to sell more to Europe and to the Middle East. Everybody is seeing an opportunity in the security space for unusual linkages that allow countries to play roles with each other that previously were not standard or even fathomable without the U.S. being a directly involved. So on security, there's a lot of opportunity on the minilateral side. Now let's move to economics and trade. I'm less optimistic that minilaterals will be successful in economic and trade matters, particularly when it comes to technology. And the reason why is the simple reality is the structure of the global economy is such that the U.S. is ultimately the demand sink for most of the world. The U.S. market is where, when China manufactures or Southeast Asia manufactures, it ends up here. So one way or another, because of the dollar's role as a reserve currency, the U.S. has the kind of reciprocal quality of being the ultimate source of demand for the world economy. Can that be replaced? Can it be replaced if Asia consumes more? Maybe. Can it be replaced if Latin America or Africa consumes more? Maybe. But the reality is none of them will be able to consume enough to sustain the production that they have. And it's difficult for minilaterals to work when all the countries involved are essentially creditor countries, or they're countries with major trade surpluses. And that's the situation we find ourselves in now. So it's good that countries are making these arrangements, but I think we should be realistic about how much they'll be able to compensate for any diminishment in U.S. demand. Which brings me to a final set of points. What will a deal look like between the U.S. and its allies? What is the ideal shape of that deal? If you listen to President Trump and some on his team, all they care about is bilateral trade deficits. But we know that there's more to the story than bilateral trade deficits. We know, for example, that many of the countries that are implicated in these trade deals also have technology to offer, they have investment they can provide to the United States, and they have things they need from the United States, including greater access to sophisticated weaponry. So you could imagine 4 points in any kind of deal, whether it's with Israel or with other countries around the world. And some countries will have different parts of this that they'll do better. But one is that we essentially drop tariffs between these countries, between the U.S. and the country it's trying to do a deal with. We'll keep them at a low level. There might still be non-tariff barriers, but the low tariff rate produces a lot of good. The second possibility is that you could have investment from other countries into the United States. That's more relevant for Japan or Korea, which have key manufacturing capabilities the U.S. now lacks. The third component is some degree of security cooperation, which looks like the U.S. providing more technology forward, but those countries providing perhaps more willingness to take up certain burdens. This may be less relevant in the Middle East, but maybe more relevant in Asia. And the final component would be the moat. Essentially, countries around the world putting up some kind of barriers to China's sheer capacity. And I'll end with one final fact. China is right now about 30% of global manufacturing. In 5 to 6 years, it'll be 40% of global manufacturing. That's not leaving a lot of space for other countries that want to be involved in manufacturing. And so there needs to be some way collectively of handling that enormous capacity so that our industries can survive. And that'll look like, I think, quiet agreements to restrict the flow of certain Chinese goods into third markets. And the goal is not to decouple, it's not necessarily to de-risk, is to create breathing room for other industries to create scale so they can be successful. And of course, there's a lot more to the global economy than software. Manufacturing does count, and that's where this will be the most relevant. So let me stop there.
Well, that covered quite a lot of ground, and I would say that certainly we in Israel don't believe there's a replacement for the U.S. on many levels, but I think globally, no, I don't think even China thinks there's a replacement for the United States. It's got its own unique contributions, but at the same time, perhaps we can have more opportunity created, not only for security interaction, but Mareike, also in the area of working together. I mean, IMEC was discussed quite a bit, and I don't want to continue that discussion here, but that is one example of where trade is moving between the East and West, and also probably bringing in the North-South, which does not necessarily include either the US or China. So do you see that's a possibility, opportunity resulting from these developments?
I think one opportunity that we have beyond the resulting from these developments is, and that's both an opportunity and a challenge, is the need to rethink a lot of things very fundamentally, and to act and to take action that we have long not wanted to take. And again, I can go back to Europe, where we've been talking about a lot of actions that are needed to be done in Europe's interests, and a lot of those are related to China. To start pushing back more forcefully against China, and there's always barriers against that and arguments against that. And under the current circumstances, if things go well, we will be forced to do it because we won't have any other options. And that, of course, is a massive challenge, but it can also be an opportunity. And I think a similar principle works in other areas where countries that have long had, interests in common, but there are certain barriers against it, or it's not a priority number one, are now doing things because you have to rethink quite fundamentally, and you have to look, where are your interests and what are you able to do? And some initiatives are going to get a push from that, I believe. And that is not per se a bad thing. Now, again, I'm not actually a glass half full person on this. I do see a lot of challenges, but it is forcing us to rethink. And it will prompt new developments, and that in general is good.
Ashok, you have a long history relationship with Israel, and you come from a strong business background in your current position. What is your perception of how Israel should position itself in this rivalry, and what their opportunities might be regarding new relationships and minilaterals where India has a growing good relationship with Israel?
First, I'd like to go back to something Rush said about no country or combination of countries replacing the demand sink that the US is. I would say it's more than that. I completely agree with him there. I would say the US, with all the Trumpian disruption, with all the problems we're facing, with all the domestic challenges and internal wrestling in the US, remains an irreplaceable power. If you're talking about even something like IMEC, yes, the US is extra regional to IMEC. It's not part of Europe or the Middle East or South Asia or the subcontinent. But quite honestly, without a significant buy-in by the US and a push by the US, IMEC will never reach fruition. It will, the many parts of IMEC will continue doing business with each other, but the whole will never quite happen without a larger strategic buy-in which has US backing. So I'm pretty clear about that. We are all looking at not an absent US, because that would be catastrophic for everybody. We are looking at a less present US, perhaps, for its own reasons. In this entire process, all of us are looking at different arrangements, different partnerships that allow us to fill some of the gaps that the US is leaving behind. Whether in security, whether in terms of a market, we need to find new markets for our products, our goods, our services much more aggressively, even though the collective weight of all of those markets might not equal what we've lost in the US. Every country is struggling with this, which is why every country, despite the exasperation with the volatile tariff movements in Trump's America, wants a tariff or trade deal with America. Every single country, including India, is holding its nose and saying, let's do that deal. So America remains very, very important and in many ways irreplaceable. But what Israel can do, what India is doing. Look around you. Look at how countries are trying to find alternatives in some way or the other. The best example is the sixth generation fighter project put together by Japan, Italy, and the UK. I know of at least 3 Asian countries outside Japan that are looking to sign up and are negotiating. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, at least 2 of those countries, and perhaps even Italy itself would have considered working much more closely with America. But people are looking for alternatives. People are looking to hedge, and that is where the opportunity lies, even for America's steadfast friends, such as Israel and I would say India.
Leo, what do you think of this, Ashok's perspective on that? Where do you see Israel's potential and opportunities as far as new relationships?
Yeah, I fully agree with Ashok's overview and vision about how things are moving. I would, as a macroeconomist, I would like to point out that of course, we are going to see a declining U.S. economy, and the risk of recession is there. And the number one country that is going to suffer from trade war is the United States. And I think there is pretty much a consensus in Wall Street that the forecast is one of stagflation, so some kind of stagnation. I'm not sure that there will be a deep recession or even a recession, but clearly a slowdown in the growth of the US economy coupled with some rise in inflation. That is bad news for the United States. It is bad news for the whole world. So the first effect I think we have to consider is a scaling down of international trade, of the volume, because even if the United States moves apart, there is not a one-to-one substitution via the entry of Europe or China. And again, it has been said, the United States is the most powerful and richest economy in the world, and we are talking about a transition that may take many, many years. So we have all to be prepared to this scaling down that means that the world economic activity will be much below the potential growth in the next few years. In terms of the diversification factor, yes, I think that there are new opportunities, and Marek has also indicated that. Let me give another example in addition to the one given by Ashok. Having been born in Argentina and as someone that follows a lot Latin America and emerging markets, I can tell you that the trade links between China and Mexico, China and Brazil, China and Argentina are going up exponentially. So, 2-3 years from now, many US companies are going to find out that there is no demand for their products because China is there. And Latin America, as you know, is a major exporter of commodities, for example, agricultural commodities, food, things that China and some of the Asian countries are in very high demand. So that there is a very mutual trade over there to be taken. And I'm also, I don't know about your views, but definitely the intensity of the trade between Europe and China is immense. There is they are very, very important trading partners. And therefore, I think that, once again, it's not the end of the world, but clearly, let us hope that some of this is a transitory phenomenon. We don't know what's going to happen. But in terms of the Trump reactions to the evolution of the United States economy, because one scenario that worries me is that if the slowdown in the U.S. economy is very strong, Trump may be even taking a more extreme view on tariffs, because in his narrative, and it is not a new narrative, it is a narrative of 3 or 4 decades. People don't know that. He has been publishing articles in the New Wall Street Journal and advertisements about how international trade is damaging the U.S. economy for decades. So this is something that is in very embedded in his belief, and he may think that that more tariffs are needed in order to induce more growth in the United States economy, and that may be worrisome. But yes, this is a time of transition. This is a time of finding new opportunities, and we know that when everything is moving, yes, there are those countries and companies and entities that are going to find the windows of opportunity.
So not the end of the world, but maybe the end of the world as we know it. And I'm going to ask for final remarks from each. But first, Ashok, you wanted to respond.
I'll make that my final set of remarks as well. With due respects, Professor, the current globalization and trade model has more challenges than just the US and just Trump. It is far from being an unmixed blessing.
But the way, if you allow me,
Yes.
the way to resolve the issues is to sit around the table.
I don't think the other party wants to sit around the table, with due respects. Again, not going into politics in America right now, but I'm not sure China was willing to sit around the table. Second, perhaps because of your geographical location, perhaps because you've had enormous stresses in your near neighborhood, almost existential stresses and crises. I completely appreciate that as a friend of Israel. You haven't had to confront realism about a lot of questions related to China that other countries are confronting. One day you'll have to. I'll just stop there.
Okay. Rush, can you please share your final thoughts in a minute?
In a minute, sure. I agree with everything Ashok just said. I think it's exactly right. The international trading system is profoundly imbalanced. There is a China element at the heart of that, including, again, the fact that they are more than 30% of global production and less than 17% of global consumption. A delta sustainable when they had a smaller economy, but unsustainable as their economy achieves the status it has today. That does force questions in the economic and tech space for everybody, including Israel. The bigger point, I think, is as these trade deals are resolved, a critical question for all countries will be what the US asks from those countries on China. And that question now, having been of the mantra that we should not force countries to choose, that question is now being called. And countries increasingly will have to make choices about the structure of their domestic economies that will be, in some cases, painful, in other cases, quite lucrative, depending on how which industries you look at. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And my mic is off. That's done. Maraike. Oh, Maraike, please.
Very brief, three quick points in response to some of our discussion. Once, I keep hearing 2028. I'm slightly less optimistic that the United States is going to make a 180-degree turnaround again. I do think what we're currently seeing from America is based on structural factors that are not going away. So whether or not, whatever happens in 2028, we'll be contending with what we're dealing with right now for a long time to come. I'm not expecting a full return. Second, I want to second the China challenge is real. It's very real for Europe. It's very much, we do have a problem with our industry because it's very, very real. And it's something that Europe has had to deal with for a very long time by pushing back harder. And therefore, third point, I do hope that the current situation is going to force us to do just that because we have no other option. And again, even though I'm not a glass half full person, I'll end on this optimistic note. I really hope it's going to push a lot of countries to grow up and do the things that have been necessary to do for a really long time.
Necessity is the mother of invention. So I want to thank all of our panelists in the US, from Israel, from Germany, from India. Thank you so much, everyone. It was outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the previous session, and before I forget anybody, I would like to ask, first of all, our guest from abroad, from afar, Professor Fan Hong Da, to join us, Dr. Ariel Levite, Mr. Nitzan Horowitz, and hopefully we should have Dr. Liao online. I hope we see his face in a second. Yeah. So there's an issue, yes. Ellie, thank you. Yes. All right. I don't understand, but this is last year or this year? Oh, I didn't know. From here? With pleasure. One second. We're talking now about China-Israel relations in a shifting Middle East, and I think that's a sort of an understatement to describe this as shifting Middle East. This has been, as I mentioned earlier, 601 days into the war, and which is still remaking the Middle East to a large extent. And we started off this war at a problematic position when it comes to China-Israel relations. It has reached one of its lowest points, I think, since the establishment of China-Israel diplomatic relations back in 1992. However, I think that both sides at this stage are trying to address this relationship and restore this relationship. And I have to say, to his credit, I'm not sure if this is helpful for Professor Fan Hong Da. His approach from the outset was different, at least from I think a bit different from the official Chinese line. And I remember something that he wrote. This is not something he said, it's something he wrote. And I quote from memory, or paraphrase, that you can still denounce or condemn what happened on October 7 and continue to support the Palestinian cause. But we are here now also to discuss broader issues in the Middle East and the Chinese perspective, be it from the nuclear file, and nuclear energy issues, be it Iran, be it the Palestinian issue. And to this end, we brought together a broad range of speakers. To my far left, Dr. Eli Levite, who's a senior fellow with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former deputy national security advisor of Israel. To his right, I'm not sure if both of them like that sort of a definition, but whatever. Mr. Nitzan Horowitz, former Minister of Health, and he served on the Security Cabinet of the Bennett Lapid government. He chaired the Meretz party then. In the middle, need no introduction, but nonetheless, Ms. Chris Witte, my master and executive director of Signal Group. And as I mentioned, Professor Fan Hong Da from Shanghai International Studies University. We're very happy that he's made it. And online, I think, Adam, is he online? The Dr. Liao from Beijing, is he online? Apparently not. So I hope he will rejoin, because he was online at one stage. But I understand that Professor Fana has a few opening remarks. So please, since you're the guest from afar, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I have visited Israel for several times, including a year at Tel Aviv University. I'm grateful to Signal for bringing me back again. China and Israel are indeed in urgent need for more exchange. What I would like to do next is share some of my personal understandings on the China-Israel relationship. To be frank, I became quite concerned about the China-Israel relations after the outbreak of Gaza war in 2021. At that time, in order to explore a better strategy for China to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli conflicts, I published a series of articles rethinking the Gaza-Israel war and the Palestinian issues. I remember that an Israeli friend translated one of my articles into English. In my view, the Palestinian issue has long been one of the core factors shaping China's attitude toward Israel over the past few decades. After the October 7 attack, my first reaction was to worry about further damage to China-Israel relations. Unfortunately, subsequent developments confirmed that my concerns were not unfounded. The ongoing impact of October 7 attack had been profound. Let us focus on the damage caused to China-Israel relations as a result. Do these two countries have fundamental conflicts of interest? I believe no one can give positive answers to this question. When I was a visiting professor at the Tel Aviv University a decade ago, I often heard Israeli friends say, the relations with China would be the country's most important relationship in the future. So although China-Israel relations are currently face some troubles, I'm not pessimistic about the future. But it can't ignore that the third-party factors often affect the China-Israel relations. This is an issue that both countries must take seriously if they really want to have a healthy bilateral relationship. China and Israel should work hard to avoid letting third parties become obstacles to their relations. Israel often expresses concerns about the deepening China-Iran relationship. I have also seen reports of some Israelis disliking or even opposing the ongoing US-Iran negotiations. In my view, it is more important for Israel to improve relations with Tehran rather than destroy the Islamic Republic. I am convinced that if Tehran improves its relations with the United States, there is a great possibility for Israel and Iran relations to improve as well, which would be beneficial for Israel. A peaceful and stable Middle East is more beneficial for China. Such a Middle East is also good for regional countries, including Israel. Israel has no reason to worry about China's motives in the region because China's diplomacy in the Middle East is not about creating conflicts, but about promoting development and peace. While seeking economic opportunities, I believe this aligns with what Israel also desires. Let's go back to October 7 attack. It is indeed a disaster that Israel and the Jewish people should never forget. I have noticed many Israelis have been reflecting on why it happened. The international community remains deeply divided in its views on ongoing Gaza war. I finished a year of living in the United States last October and witnessed firsthand the social divisions caused by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the United States. Regarding China's response to the October 7 attacks, there have certainly been some statements from China that Israel finds unfavorable. But I hope Israeli friends can take note that both Chinese scholars and the public widely criticize and even condemn the Hamas attack. The Chinese government has also been opposed to violence. Indeed, there are quite a number of Chinese people who view the October 7 attack as an act of terrorism. I'm pleased to see that both Israel and China are working hard to promote the positive development of bilateral relations, including signals consistent efforts. This is exactly what the two countries should do. So despite the difficulties I face, I have come here to engage an open and honest dialogue with you all for the sake of better future of China-Israel relations. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fan. I wanted to say, before I turn to Carice, I want to acknowledge and welcome to the discussion Professor Dr. Liao in Beijing. I hope you can hear us. We are sorry that you were unable in the last minute to join us. Do you hear us well? Yes. All right, wonderful. So I will turn to you in a moment. Carice, you heard Professor Van Hong Da, and I think you hosted him a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. More than a day, yeah. She doesn't forget anything. I can say that. Do you concur with Professor Fan's, how would I say, characterization of Israel-China relations since 2021? He pointed to the 2021 as a turning point, but do you concur?
Okay, first of all, I think you said that the Chinese government condemned Hamas. It didn't. The first time we heard a condemnation was from your ambassador, your current ambassador to Israel, His Excellency Ambassador Xiao, who did publicly on television a couple of weeks ago. I do agree that May 2021 was a watershed for China-Israel relations because that was when China held the Security Council presidency at the UN and raised votes to compel Israel to end a war that was very dangerous at a time that was very dangerous. And when the US vetoed that vote, which is one of the reasons, by the way, we have this close relationship with the United States, is that they are there for us when dangerous things are suggested in the United Nations, and the US prevents them from happening. The Chinese response was that the US was on the wrong side of morality. That was a watershed for, in my understanding, and for the understanding of Signal Group. And I also don't fully agree that the Palestinian factor has been a driving force in the relationship or a guiding force in the relationship all the decades, because from 2010 until very recently, the Palestinian issue was bifurcated. Yes, we support the Palestinians, but we're also very friendly with the Israelis. And they said the Palestinians are our brothers and the Israelis are our friends. And business was done, a lot of business. And the Palestinian situation was not resolved, and it didn't really make progress, but it didn't bother China. It was okay for China to have good relations with Israel and with the Palestinian Authority. And I would say that that's because really what drives the relationship is interests. And we can take it back to China having joined the Arab boycott back in the 50s, especially after the Bandung Conference in 1955, and didn't have anything to do with Israel until it was expedient and under the table through Saul Eisenberg, an international businessman, traded and sold Israeli defense equipment to China. And we can jump to the present, where China's interests in Israel were for water and agriculture technology. And that lasted until China became independent, or at least decided that it could manage without Israel's water technology. But then it became defense and intelligence. From the 90s until 2000 and 2004, when the United States caused Israel to cancel the Harpy and Falcon deals. But until that point, we had intelligence and defense sharing. So again, that interest came to an end. But then, in 2010, innovation. China decided to become the world's innovators, and Israel was a supplier not only of innovation, but of learning to innovate. They purchased the Technion in order to help them move forward in that goal. But then they became good at innovating and changed some of the foreign FDI, foreign direct investment rules, and so that became less important. And little by little, the major things that were causing China to be interested in Israel were coming to an end. Infrastructure was another area where there was a big interest by China to work in an OECD country, learn how to do major infrastructure deals and build with all of those rules and regulations. And then that ended. So now we're at a point where, and especially after October 7, when China no longer saw Israel as a regional power, there was not really an interest in being friends with Israel. There was no added value to it. The opposite. It was valuable to China to, be on the other side of what the U.S. stance. So if the U.S. was supporting Israel, China was not supporting Israel. And therefore, I would say that to a large extent, we can understand that the relationship that China has with Israel has been driven by its interests, and as its interests have evolved, so has the relationship.
Thank you, Carice. But Nitzan, I have to turn to you because I listened carefully to Professor Fanas, you did probably, and he spoke about a relationship between Iran and Israel, which China would gladly facilitate, and about trying to move ahead with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. What's wrong with that? Isn't that an idea that the time has come?
Well, I wish we could have a regional deal. You know, it's being discussed. Of course, we are in the middle of the war. But let me first complete Carissa's remarks regarding the Israel-China, bilateral relations. You know, I monitored the relations between the two countries in the last year and a half since the October 7th attack. And it seems to me that there was like a pendulum movement, תנועת מטוטלת, okay? Like there was a change. As Caris mentioned correctly, right after the October 7th attack and the beginning of the war, China was quite hostile towards Israel, also in official remarks, but also very bluntly on the Chinese social media, social networks. It was very, very offensive towards Israel. But nevertheless, I think even at that time, China sort of maintained its formal relations with Israel without any substantial change. There was a change of the tone and also a change in economic approach, okay? But then, a few months later, I think it began to change. And I think the change in the Chinese relations with Israel came at the end of last year, when Israel had some very remarkable military success in Lebanon and Syria, vis-a-vis Iran. And then China, I think, realized that Israel is still a very strong factor in the Middle East, and so it should maintain good relations or improved relations with Israel. And so we saw a phone call between the Chinese foreign minister and the Israeli foreign minister. It was then Israel Katz, and they had a phone call. And then there was a meeting between the Chinese foreign minister and the Israeli foreign minister, Gideon Saar,
Yes,
the new one.
We have a tradition now of replacing them often.
Okay, in the Munich conference. And so this was a very sort of interesting meeting because I would quote, the official transcript by the Chinese government was that China is ready to resume exchanges in all aspects as soon as possible, as the situation eases, of course, so as to promote the sustainable development of the innovative, comprehensive partnership between the two countries. Okay? And then the Israeli foreign minister said that Israel strongly supports the one China policy. Okay, so that was an interesting thing. By the way, we have here Professor Hong Fan, and so I saw your article on October, I think, and you mentioned the weakness of Iran and the problems of the Iranian regime, and I think it emphasized the importance, nevertheless, of Israel in China's eyes, so that Israel is still a strong, powerful military power in the region, and so China should try to maintain good relations. Although, you know, the war is still going on, the Palestinian problem, the traditional Chinese position towards a two-state solution, etc., etc. So I think now maybe now, after a year and a half of some upheavals and crisis and drama, maybe we're again on a more steady track between our two countries, maybe.
But Eli, if I may, there is a broader agenda between Israel and China, or should be a broader agenda when it comes to the Middle East. Would you be so kind to elaborate?
Well, I'm perfectly willing to elaborate, but let me preface this by saying, besides thanks to Signal for putting forward this panel, is that I'm not an expert on Israeli-Chinese relations. I work with the Chinese on other issues. I work on security issues in the Middle East, but I'm not an expert on Israeli-Chinese relations. Having said that, looking from my perspective at both the shifting Middle East and the potential for Chinese-Israeli relations to address both the opportunities and the risks that are coming about, I think there are at least 4 areas that I identify where China and China and Israel could collaborate. And I'm saying this bearing in mind that those are areas that would not be significantly hampered by the big US shadow hanging over the relationship, or even some of the domestic issues that are holding back Israel from doing certain things or China doing certain things in the bilateral relationship. So I want to talk about 4 areas: nuclear energy, nuclear proliferation, freedom of navigation, and threat of terrorism and terrorist armies. So let me tackle those very, very quickly, Tommy. So global warming, growing populations, and more energy-intensive industries and requirements, both because of the populations and the technologies that are necessary and so on, are driving a lot of states in the Middle East towards nuclear power. We see this in Turkey, in UAE, in Egypt, and so on. Saudi Arabia wants to go next, and so on. Others are interested, Jordan being a case in point, and so on. I think China and Israel share an interest that this development of peaceful nuclear energy in the Middle East proceed uneventfully. Because China is building a lot of nuclear energy for domestic purposes, wants to export some, and I fundamentally believe that they're making sure that the standards are not compromised, and that nuclear energy does provide solid energy safely, security, from a safety and security point of view, is an interest that both countries share. We don't want accidents and incidents in the Middle East. We don't want them in China or anywhere else in the world. Issue 1. Issue 2, nuclear proliferation. So the Middle East has long had countries expressing interest in nuclear weapons. Libya, Syria, Iraq, and of course we've already touched repeatedly on the Iran issue. The Iran issue is much bigger than the Iran issue because Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia have all expressed interest in going for nuclear weapons if Iran does. The potential spillover from Asia to the Middle East and from the Middle East to Asia on nuclear weapons is palpable. You have both Pakistan and North Korea that have provided nuclear weapons relevant technology to the Middle East. And there is the spiral that could go back if things go badly. Here, for example, South Korea is looking at Iran as a threshold state and how it's being treated. I think China and Israel stand to benefit if they collaborate on how does one deal with the nuclear proliferation issue in the Middle East and beyond. So that's area number 2. Issue number 3. Red Sea, Gulf of Oman, Straits of Hormuz are key arteries of global trade. There have been a lot of disruptions to these. Some of them have come from Iran in the form of intelligence, mining, targeting, capturing, whatever, and so on. Some have come from Somali pirates, and so on. Some have come from Houthis that are supported by Iran, and to some extent with Russia, and so on. Israel and China stand a great deal to benefit from freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. It's not a coincidence that China established a base in Djibouti. Let's face it. China has been taking part, albeit separately, in the anti-piracy operation off the Somali coast. So all I'm saying is I think that given that our interests are now more profound in the Red Sea maritime security, as is China's, I think, and those now stretch beyond the Red Sea, also to the Gulf of Oman, I think there is a significant common interest there. So that's area 3. And area 4, we've been talking about Gaza as Gaza. But I think we're dealing here with a much bigger phenomenon, which we see not just in Gaza with the Houthis. We see terrorist armies that are taking advantage of advanced technologies to be able to produce significant domestic and international security threats. I think it's in the acute, and some of them are drawing on dual-use technologies which are cheap, and some of them even originate in China. I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm saying here is an opportunity for the two nations to collaborate on how do we deal with the terrorism and terrorist armies, security threats that are being posed by these small forces, because what's happening here in the Middle East is also a source of inspiration, including to parties that operate within China and so on. So my final thought here is, and to wrap up, Tommy, is to say the following. I think there hasn't been a lot of optimism here about China and Israel collaborating in light of the developments that have been portrayed here and so on. But I do think the potential is there. I don't think the US would stand in the way, and I sure hope we go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Dr. Liao, are we heading in the direction that Dr. Levite just prescribed? Because others would say that China's deep relations with Iran should be of concern to Israel. How do you see this? And if I may, just 1 second, Dr. Liao, I want to welcome His Excellency, the Ambassador of China to us, and he will come on stage after our session. So, Dr. Liao, back to you in Beijing. Yes, we.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for having me. Firstly, I want to say I'm fully agree with what Dr. Ilo said about we need less criticism and more cooperation between China and Israel. As the first point I want to say, and then return to the panel. And I know there are 3 guiding questions. Yeah, I'm reading it.
Yes.
I would like to reply the first one and the third one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The first one is about what are the prospects and limits of the relation to reset. And first of all, I want to clarify that the current China and Israel relationship is not about to be reset. Yeah, because reset means that there has been a significant stagnation or regression in the China-Israel relationship. However, in my opinion, the China-Israel relation has been ongoing, although we have different views on some certain issues. In fact, this difference has existed for a long time and could not be passed or resolved before. And it's becoming more apparent after October 7, 2023. So what are these obstacles or difference between us? I think it's mainly due to American factor and the Palestine issue. We talked that with Greece before. I think the US factor probably is the biggest obstacle to further deepening and expanding China-Israel relations, which can be said to be the ceiling and prevents China-Israel relations from further improving. It leads to cooperation between the two countries only in limited areas, as Chris said, water, or culture, or innovation. This situation has become even more apparent after the outbreak of October 7, 2023. because after that, almost the whole world can see how special, I mean, the relationship between the United States and Israel is. And if the factor of the USA is only related to the interests of China and Israel, I think then the Palestinian issue involves different principled positions of the two countries. We can say the former one is acceptable, but the latter one is very difficult to change because it's related to principle of our two countries. And from this perspective, the biggest factor limiting the further improvement and development of China-Israel relations, how to say, is actually Israel itself. I will say very, very frankly, because I wonder, would you change your relationship with the United States? Would you change your stance on Palestine? I think the answer is very obvious. And evidenced by Israel's recent drone attacks in the Gaza Strip. Is the first point I want to say. And the second point, on the issue of the relations between our two countries, I would like to clarify who would prefer to see changes. Actually, it comes more from Israel than China. It's probably a little different from what you said. You know, in the invitation letter I received, there is a passage that reads, with Israel's intelligence and operational success rewriting the regional narrative from Lebanon, Iran, onto Syria and Gaza, China has been recalibrating its posture in the Middle East and policy towards Israel. The expression of this sentence is very interesting. Simply put, I want to say it overestimates Israel and underestimates China. Similarly, the third guiding question is also interesting. Let me read that can Israel shape Chinese behavior through economic or diplomatic engagement? I want to say China is not the USA. There is no Jewish lobbying group, and there are no religious or cultural connections. Shape, you know, is a big word, showing a strong sense of confidence. You can say you try to influence, try to persuade, try to communicate. I think these kinds of words are possible. But when it comes to shaping, it's too difficult. In fact, I think I cannot be shaped myself, even though I have been to Israel, even though I have received many visits from Israeli scholars and delegations. Is the third point, is the second point. And finally, what I want to say is that we should pay more attention to the positive and good aspects, just as Dr. Ariel said, focus more on cooperation, less on criticism, because this kind of challenge and obstacles are very difficult to be resolved. For example, despite the influence of the USA, we have been working hard to expand our cooperation areas and try to find new ways of cooperation. Despite having different positions on the Palestinian issue, China has always viewed the problem and formulated policies based on the right and wrong of the matter, rather than being biased. And more importantly, the Chinese people have not have or developed a sense of anti-Semitism or erupt in protests or demonstrations as a result. And comparing to the United States and many other European countries recently. So I would like to say, or I would like to ask, what do you expect more from China? I want to stop here.
Thank you very much for those candid remarks, because I think it's an important contribution to this discussion, because it's important here to be straightforward, I think. Dr. Fanong Da, so where do we go from here? How do we establish a dialogue?
Today's dialogue?
Today's a dialogue, it's true.
Frankly, I enjoy today's dialogue. Just as I said a moment ago, now there is indeed Israel and China. We need to have more exchange. But actually, I have a question. I have a question for Israeli friend. Because of ongoing Gaza war, many countries criticize Israel. I want to know why China has almost been the only target Israel criticized.
No, you see, that's should I answer that? Can I answer that? No, see, because it's first of all, I have to say two things, and I'm sure that Carice will add a few others. But I think the number one reason for the Israeli contestation regarding this issue was the fact that until two and a half weeks ago, no official Chinese government spokesperson or official said explicitly, directly, and not in vague terms, that China condemns what happened on October 7th. I think that is the main reason for whatever came after. Not the only one, but the main one. And I see that Carice wants to add to that. So I'll let her.
Very simple. With great power comes great responsibility. You're a great power. You have a responsibility. So I'm not sure that China was the only one that Israel was concerned about with respect to criticizing Israel over the war. However, first of all, Signal Group is a China-oriented organization, so we're going to be thinking about China. But on the wider picture, China is a rising superpower, and you are a huge and quite amazing great power, and therefore, when someone with such a huge footprint, economically, diplomatically, globally, you have friends all over the world. We know, you tell us all the time. You're friends with everyone in the region. So how does your friendship express itself and your power express itself? It does not acknowledge the reality of October 7th. And as you had written, you can do both. you can support the Palestinians and acknowledge the horrors of October 7.
I want to ask, and I want to bring Nitzan back into this discussion, because you have visited China immediately in the aftermath of October 7, together with Caris and Signal Group, and then last year again, and you're sitting here today. Do you think something is changing? And by the way, all right, from an Israeli perspective, sorry for this, should we kiss and forget and make up and just what happened, or?
Well, let me tell my Chinese friend here. This is a conference about China, so we're dealing with the Chinese reaction and the relations between Israel and China. But regarding the war and the situation in the Middle East, well, many countries criticize Israel, and Israel has issues with many countries, so China is not the only one. Not at all. Not at all. I think, as Tommy and Caris mentioned, let me just explain that, on October 7th, Israel was attacked in a very vicious way. And even countries that are not in excellent relations with Israel condemned this attack. And China didn't say anything and talked about the two sides. And I'm talking about even before Israel started the war in Gaza, just after the October 7th attack, which was very traumatic for Israelis. So for us, we have here the Israeli ambassador to China, who witnessed this firsthand, this very difficult attitude that we felt. So, this was something that we mentioned. And Tommy, you remember when during the last year conference, Israel, I talked about some steps.
I didn't want to mention it, actually, yes.
Yeah, I talked about some steps that Israel was considering towards China. For instance, strengthening the relations with Taiwan, for instance, stuff like that. But I think we are beyond that. We are beyond it. I think so. I think China emphasized in recent months its desire to maintain good relations with Israel. That is an important statement by China. We appreciate it. We understand it. And I think Israel also would like to maintain and to improve relations with China. I think this is, and I'm not a representative of the government, believe me, but I think this is a true sort of image of Israel's position. And so maybe, and I think to end the war, it's a primary condition. Once the war is ended in Gaza, maybe with a ceasefire, with an agreement, with something, then I believe that the road will be open again to renew relations in each and every aspect with China. Okay, that's my assessment. Okay, and to answer your question before about Iran, I heard you. Look, the thing is that between the Israeli people and the Iranian people, there is no animosity. The problem is within the leadership, okay? The current Iranian leadership declared many times that it would like to see Israel erased off the map, okay? Destroying Israel. Israel never said that it would like to destroy Iran. Not at all, never. So our conflict is with the Islamic Republic's leadership, not with the Iranian people, okay? And so I believe that once the Iranian leadership attitudes would change, okay, and they would stop with this erasing Israel and destroying Israel and eliminating Israel, then I believe
again, that the road would be open again for good relations, as we had before the Islamic Revolution, and of course you know about it.
Eli, you outlined an agenda. Do you think we can advance it seriously? Do you think we can?
Well, I fundamentally believe that we can.
Because I have to stress this point here. You mentioned this in briefing, and but I hope you won't. I'm not overstepping, but you have a wealth of experience in engaging with China on nothing to do with Israel's issues. Do you think there is openness on the Chinese side, and would this benefit Israel's national security?
You're raising more than one question. Let me try and deal with those. Let me try and deal with those kind of very succinctly. I see we're operating under the pressure of time, and I'm dying to hear the ambassador here and hear his views. So I'll say the following. First of all, I'm not criticizing China. I am only observing that I think there were missed opportunities. When President Macron and President Biden and the British Prime Minister all showed up here, there was an opportunity for China that China missed. And I'm not saying this because of sympathy for Israel, but I think China does not believe in the use of violence. China likes stability. China does not want to encourage extreme terrorism, and China wants to promote and encourage political settlement, including on the Palestinians, but not exclusively on the Palestinians. That's the Chinese policy broadly defined. By the way, between us, I also think that you missed an opportunity initially on Ukraine. But I think ultimately China made a huge difference when President Xi told President Putin, don't even think about using nuclear weapons. So China, I think, missed some opportunities. I'm not saying this is a criticism. China has its own interests. But I think there was a missing of opportunities to actually speak out on the values that China espouses, not on the values that Eli Levita espouses. Now I come to all of the 4 areas that I mentioned, I think are first and foremost Chinese interests. China is interested in against terrorism and use of violence. China is interested in freedom of navigation. China is interested in nuclear energy, and China is very strong supportive of nuclear non-proliferation. I've been working on some of those issues with my Chinese counterparts, and have found that dialogue, not as an Israeli, mind you, not that I conceal my Israeli identity, extremely, extremely constructive, including on very delicate issues. I won't go into any specifics here in this forum. So I think the potential is there. I think the Chinese expertise is there. I think the Chinese interest to promote it is there. And I would say one more thing. Given how much trouble the Israeli bureaucracy and political leadership is involved in at the moment, not just the war, other issues, I think a lot depends on Chinese initiative. If China expressed interest in saying, okay, you know, the Red Sea security is an issue of interest to China. How can we collaborate? Can we exchange information on what are the source of threats? Can we discuss it and so on? What type of proliferation, what type of action follows? You can debate later. There is going to be a lot of nuclear power in the Middle East. How do we make sure that it's safe and secure? What role would Israel welcome in China promoting a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear program? I think it's in Chinese interest as much as it is in Israel. I'm talking about the diplomatic one, not a military one, a diplomatic one. By the way, I was involved in dealing with the North Korean issue. China was extremely constructive in its attitude. So, but I'm saying to your question, I think China needs to take the lead, not because you're just a superpower, but because of the complications here in terms of the government coherence.
We are running out of time, as Chris warned us, but I want to turn back to Dr. Liao. You listened carefully. I saw you listening very carefully to what Dr. Levite just said. What do you think about Chinese initiative to that end? Dr. Liao?
Yes.
What do you think about what Dr. Levite just said?
Yeah, I fully agree with him.
Oh,
You know, I'm listening to him very, very carefully. And I want to say very frankly, I like this guy very much. He knows China very well. And I would like to hear more about him. And I would like to invite you to come to China.
all right.
No other things. Fully agree with him.
All right. Well, Eddie, I think, now the ball is in your court. Yes. I think that, I think that's all you need to say, right? No, to be clear, I think you've been working on these issues you elaborated on for the past, 8 years at least, as I can remember. But I think it's time to wrap up. Just if somebody wants to add a sentence, I know that Carice said that she wants to add a word, so I don't want to get no.
I just want to say that on anti-terror, Ellie, we were talking to the Chinese, think tanks before COVID about this common interest that we share against terrorism. And there were some small things done between Israel and China, but it was very limited. And in spite of the fact that we shared that interest and sharing regional security, many interests that we share, and just found that because of China's size and versus Israel's size, China's interests and its goals versus Israel's interests and goals, it's very difficult, and I don't want to be, the glass half empty person, because I am very optimistic in general, but I think we have to be aware that as much as these are China's interests, you're absolutely right, and they're Israel's interests, there are other overriding interests that sometimes interfere. And I think that Professor Liao noted one of them. He mentioned the United States. And so we need, China's interest with respect to the United States trumps everything, no pun intended.
Two short remarks. First of all, thank you, Carice, for organizing all that. Professor Fan, you may think that this is a common event, but this is one of a kind in Israel. There are no such events about Israeli-China relations at all. In Israel, it's only thanks to Carice and Signal that this thing is happening, and there are guests from all over the world and from China, of course. So thank you, very important. And second, and this is related, unfortunately, Israel does not have a long-term policy vis-à-vis China. That's the truth. The government is not discussing that. Really, a little bit among, within the foreign ministry, but there is no policy. It's not mesudar. It's not organized, and it's a big mess. So, unlike your country where you have like long-term plans and you have big policy projects, Israel is not like that. And so I wish, and I know that this is a Carice's goal, that our country as well would develop an organized, well-structured policy towards China, where we can take everything into considerations. We can use the expertise of Carice, Signal, of other experts, and we have good, really excellent minds in Israel, and I call upon the government of Israel to use it and to develop a long-term policy towards China. Yeah.
I defer to Nitzan, but here's where my skepticism comes in. I don't think there's going to be a new Israeli policy toward China in the next year or year and a half, for many reasons, including the American one, but it's not exclusively the American one, it's the issues and so on. I mean, clearly some of the situation that we're describing is Israeli fault, not just Chinese fault. Let's face it. But I would say the following. When my last visit to China, which was in December, my Chinese counterpart said to me, and I have to be very careful in how I frame it because we said we don't quote people and whatever.
Yes, yes.
They said, look, if you expect breakthroughs between the US and Chinese relations on the official level, every time there will be a thaw, something will happen that will kill it. Because of domestic developments here, domestic developments here, and so on. One has to find quiet channels of communication and ad hoc issues of collaboration. I fundamentally believe that that's what we need to do. I'm not even under this rubric of anti-terrorism, I think there are specific issues, right? Like, say, aviation security, maritime security, certain dual-use technologies of concern. We can talk about specifics. I fundamentally believe that we need to be able to facilitate that, and clearly some of the formal institutions ought to support this, but not be in the lead.
Well,
brief.
one sentence, because now we are risking overextending our hospitality. Yes, a sentence.
Brief conclusions. Yes, although there are some troubles, I believe China and Israel will have a better tomorrow. Relations have a better tomorrow because the two countries have not fundamental conflict of interest. This is the reason support my opinions.
Well, I think it was worthwhile just to hear that. We hope, Dr. Liao, that next year and next time you'll be able to join us in person, physically here. I want to thank the panelists, and without further ado, it's back to Clarice. Thank you all.
Ambassador, after your greetings to the ambassador, I invite you to please join me on stage. Very exciting for me to be able to host you at this event. You can take the stage anywhere you want.
So it's my floor. So distinguished Ambassador Irit Ben Abar, Executive Director Karais Witi, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to attend Signal Group's annual conference. I wish to extend my appreciation to Signal and Karais Witi for their enduring commitment to the China-Israel friendly exchanges and cooperation. Over the past 6 months since my arrival in Israel, I have been deeply impressed by the tremendous vitality and the many marvels achieved by this small country, which really ignited my curiosity. At the same time, I realized that Israel, facing a unique geopolitical environment, has no room to retreat when dealing with complex situations, leaving it with no choice but to go all in. So it leaves me with a question. Could Israel find the way out of the predicament by accommodating the interests of all the relevant parties and reaching consensus through negotiations, exploration for the future, and contemplation in times of challenge are the most immediate impression I have of Israel. How we perceive Israel determines how we perceive and develop our relationship with it. The three global initiatives proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping provide us with important inspirations. The Global Development Initiative calls for a universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, where development outcomes will be shared among different countries and across social classes. Innovation cooperation is the most crucial driving force for China and Israel to jointly achieve that goal. China has evolved from the world's factory to a global innovation hub. We took the lead in AI, quantum computing, clean energy, aviation and aerospace, etc. Meanwhile, Israel is transitioning from a world-renowned startup nation to a scale-up powerhouse. Innovation development highly relies on mobility and aggregation of global capital and professionals. Only openness and cooperation can ride the wave of the times. Setting limits, in essence, are self-imposed restraint. Israel is gifted at making breakthrough from 0 to 1, while China is better at scaling up from 1 to 100. By combining Israel's innovation momentum with China's scale advantage, we can tap into boundless development potentials. Our two countries have yielded fruitful outcomes through innovation cooperation in various fields, such as agriculture, environment protection, and medical services. Looking ahead, we need to broaden our innovation cooperation across a wider range of areas. The Global Security Initiative calls for common security realized through dialogue and cooperation. Time and again, history proves that there is no such thing as absolute security or exclusive security, because no country can seek its own security at the expense of others. It's an inevitable question for Israel to realize enduring peace and stability. Having endured both conflict and calm, Israel understands better than many other countries that war comes with risks and that peace comes at a cost. There are diverse voices across Israeli society on how to resolve the Palestinian question. The Chinese side supports the two-state solution, which is also an international consensus. It is unlikely to truly break the cycle of violence if the intergeneration transmission of hatred cannot be prevented. So we sincerely hope that Israel and the Palestinians will coexist peacefully. And the Israeli people and Arab people will live in harmony. We respect Israel's right to subsistence and development. We welcome normalization of relations between Israel and the regional countries. Israel has demonstrated its political courage in the face of challenges. What the world also expects now is its political wisdom. The global civilization initiatives calls for inclusiveness and mutual learning among civilizations. I witnessed how Jews, Arabs, Druze, Christians, Muslims, and others live together harmoniously in places like Haifa, Akka, and Khmer, and how they take pride in this coexistence. The Chinese culture pursue harmony without uniformity and oppose hate speech and behaviors targeting any specific ethnicity or region. There is no fertile ground for anti-Semitism in China. The Chinese government never allows the existence and the spread of anti-Semitism. Our two peoples shared a bond spanning a millennium. The Chinese people extended a helping hand for many times to the Jewish people in their times of great hardship. This will be the theme presented during the exhibition to be held in Israel by Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum. Besides, Jewish fighter Jacob Rosenfeld stood with the Chinese people against the Japanese aggression during World War II. Later this year, an event will be held at the Israeli Museum of the Jewish Soldier in World War II to narrate Rosenfeld's remarkable life story. Apart from remembering the history, we are also ready to embrace the future. We hope to see increasingly vibrant people-to-people exchanges, in particular among the think tanks, youth, and in the fields of cultures, sports, etc. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I invite you to join me here. Anywhere you want. It's really such an honor to have this opportunity for a one-on-one conversation. And I know that we appreciate your remarks. And as you noted, you've been ambassador, you've been in Israel for only 6 months, and yet you've already had the opportunity to meet government, academia, society, and business a number of times. Everyone has been impressed by how engaging you are, how warm, how open, how available. And that is, that marks a change. You're the fourth ambassador that I have had the privilege of working with, and the first who has been so available and accessible. So where does this contrast come from? We know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China is very professional and very connected to the establishment in China, so and follows the directives very clearly and carefully. So does it mean there's been a change in the ministry with respect to what kind of engagement there should be with China? Can I ask you to take the mic, please?
As long as the war is going on, its influence on the bilateral exchanges is unavoidable. But we remain optimistic and confident that both sides, I mean both China and Israel, have enough wisdom to limit the influence of the war to the minimum level and bring the bilateral relations back to its normal track. Since the end of last year, we all saw the restart of China-Israel relations. Our two foreign ministers meeting actually sent a very strong and important signals to both of us, to both sides. Regarding to this, I would like to say that the practical cooperation played an irreplaceable role. So during the war, a great number of Chinese companies, technicians, and workers choose to stay in Israel, and their contribution to the local economic and social development should not be ignored. The Haifa Bay Port, run by the Shanghai International Port Group, has been in operation the whole years without any single day of closing, even though hundreds of rockets poured into Haifa city and the northern part of Israel. The Tel Aviv light rail red line, constructed with the participation of China Railway Tunnel Group, is currently longest in Israel, with daily riderships of more than 120,000 passengers. A few days ago, I visited the tallest building, 320 meters high, beyond tower, built by Chinese company, is set to become the tallest skyscraper in Israel. And also we all know China Hainan Airlines has been keeping its direct flights between us throughout the war. So I just want to say our bilateral diplomatic ties dates back to 33 years ago. But the friendly exchanges between Chinese people and the Jewish people can be traced back to 1,000 years ago, which is more long-lasting, permanent, and profound. So no matter how the situation in this region or in the world changes, China's commitment to develop our traditional friendship remains unchanged. Anyhow, the early date of ceasefire and the full resumption of humanitarian aid in Gaza will help to advance our cooperation with more confidence. Thank you.
So first of all, this reminds me of one of the other contrasts between Israel and China. You take a 1,000-year perspective, and it's true. And if we zoom out to that 1,000-year perspective, what happened over the last year and a half will be dimmed. But I will say that what I understand from your remarks, and we do very much appreciate that Hainan Air continued to fly, and we very much appreciate that the Chinese workers chose, the government was thinking of pulling them out and then agreed that they should have their own choice, and they chose to stay. And I think that's not only a testament to their commitment to their job, but also a testament to the very good work environment of Israel and the fact that it's generally quite safe here in spite of everything, due to, we heard earlier from the Israel aircraft industry executive who spoke about how Israel is protected, and that's why we can sit here and peacefully speak while we know that at any time rockets and missiles can fly. So we do really appreciate that. And I also understand from your remarks that, in fact, there was a message from your ministry that it's time to improve the relationship that did suffer over the last year and a half due to the war. And of course, yes, many countries are very frustrated with Israel. And yes, Israel will definitely be able to have better relations with China and many other countries when we can move on in this very complex situation. But with respect to that, 2 weeks ago, you did an interview, very impressive, on an English language TV channel here in Israel, where you unequivocally condemned Hamas's barbaric attack on October 7th. And that was very much appreciated, but a long time in coming, because there was no clear official condemnation from the Chinese government until then. So can you please tell me what was the reason that it took so long, or up until now, and why was now the time that was decided?
Since October 7th, China has been calling for a ceasefire and the protection of civilians and the release of the hostages and civilians held captive as soon as possible. And we also done lots to facilitate the release of Israeli hostages. So China opposed any violent attacks against civilians and condemned the violations of international humanitarian laws. The violent attacks by Hamas on 7th of October that lead to heavy casualties among Israeli civilians is unacceptable, so we condemn it. At the same time, the whole world, including China, are so concerned of the situation in Gaza and oppose the acts that resulted heavy casualties among Gaza civilians. So I think if someone with an understanding of Chinese culture and the Chinese rhetorical logic, he or she may know that China did not hold off its opposition and condemnation on those violent attacks. And in my views, and I think this is also China's side's views, neither Israelis nor Palestinians should become the target of armed attacks. Violence for violence will only lead to an endless cycle of revenge. As I said before, it is unlikely to break the cycle of violence if the intergeneration transmission of hatred cannot be prevented. So we believe that if it is the civilians on both sides will continue to suffer or bear the toll, we should try our best to cooperate together to jointly find the way out of the predicament. I think this is my response to your question.
I understand. I think using the word revenge might be confusing. One of the, as you know, the stated goal is to end the threat. For Israel, and I'm sure if China were in such a situation, you would do what it takes to prevent such a thing from happening to your people at all costs. And we know that China is very careful about protecting its people, takes it very seriously. So I'm sure there's a lot of respect by the Chinese, both the people and the government, for Israel's effort to protect its citizens. I'd like to ask you, President Trump recently concluded his first international trip, and he went to the Middle East, and it was the first one of his second administration. And he was there in order to secure investments and deals with the Gulf, which is also a very important partner for China. We see that there's a lot of activity by the Gulf between China and the United States, turning to one, getting benefits, turning to the other, getting benefits. How does China view this new American-led effort, and how does Beijing interpret these actions in our region?
We welcome all the initiatives and the measures conducive to the stability and the development in the Middle East, and the efforts of the Middle East countries to independently explore their own development model should also be respected. President Trump's Gulf visit has drawn broad attention. So there are lots of media coverage and analyses. Among of them, I agree with two observations. First, the United States is strategically integrating the resources-intensive and capital-intensive regional countries into its mega agenda. So this reminded me of what President Kennedy once said, ask not what the state can do for you, ask what you can do for the state. So the regional countries engaging with the United States are now facing the similar situation. Ask not what the United States can do for the regional countries. Ask what the regional countries can do for the United States. So it's hard, for me, it's hardly to say Washington really cares about the development and the well-being of the regional countries. Second, the United States is prioritizing interests over values and norms. Within this context, Washington just began to reshape or redefine its relationship with regional allies. So if regional allies merely drain the American resources without delivering any benefits, Washington will inevitably get disappointed and become impatient. Maybe, I don't know. Under the doctrine of American First, I think no ally enjoys exceptionalism. So if the US can withdraw from the Middle East to shed the burden, it may also come back when it sees new benefits. When a major power puts its self-interests above responsibility and obligation, it risks undermining the regional stability. And this is the second observation from the media, from the analysis, I agree with it. So China does not pursue the sphere of influence, seek proxy relationships, nor aim to filling the power vacuum in the Middle East. We focus our efforts on fostering cooperation, promoting development, and enhancing stability. We support regional countries in choosing common security over zero-sum games and united over bloc confrontation so as to jointly establish or build a new security architecture for the Middle East. The Saudi-Iranian reconciliation under the mediation of China and under the guidelines of China's global security initiatives is an important step towards the new security architecture in Middle East.
Very broad, wide net that you threw, and provides a lot of insight for us into the Chinese perspective. My final question, because you have been very generous with your time, Israel's actions in the region have changed many of the dynamics, and there are new narratives now in Lebanon and Syria, and hopefully soon in Gaza. Sanctions are being lifted in Syria. Syrians are returning or thinking about returning with the treasure that they have accumulated abroad. Is this an opportunity for China? Will China, given its great capabilities in development and construction, et cetera, infrastructure, will the changes in the Middle East be something that will be a focus or an interest for China?
Egypt is the first Middle East country China established diplomatic ties with in 1956. So until 1992, when Israel and China established diplomatic ties, so we have diplomatic relations with all of the members in this region. So in the past 70 years, in the past 7 decades, we have generally speaking, we're having a very good, smooth, and friendly communications with the regional countries. So from this, one of the important experience and the lessons we draw from this is that development, the religions problems, the geopolitical conflicts, are the major contributors to the disorder or instability of this region. But above all of that, development or development issues, we know that always plays a very critical role for the building of stability in this region. So this is the reason why we insist on the cooperation with the regional countries. I agree with you. The Middle East now is at a turning point. We saw the changes after 7th October, and in some of the regional countries like Lebanon, like Syria. So this offers us, not China, I mean the whole world, a new perspective to see what will happen and what should be done. So I hope China could contribute for the stability and development of this region, not only in the fields of infrastructure constructions, but also in the political consultations and political wisdoms.
On that note, I want to thank you so much, Ambassador Xiao, for joining me. I want to thank you for being with us all afternoon, and I want to officially announce the conclusion of the 9th Annual Conference on Israel's China Policy. Thank you so much.